Just wanted to welcome everyone this afternoon to Grand Valley State University's inaugural Juneteenth gathering. So my name is Jesse Bernal, and we should clap for that. Thank you, Dr. Gaines. She's going to lead the applause from now on. So I'm Jesse Bernal. I'm Vice President for Inclusion, Equity, and Chief of Staff to President Mantella here at Grand Valley, and it's an honor to be here with you today as we come together to commemorate this momentous occasion. And I want to extend a warm welcome to everybody online who's joining us. Before we continue, I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge that Grand Valley State University is located on the traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. We recognize and honor the ongoing relationship these indigenous nations have with this land, which continues to be important cultural, spiritual, and economic, important for cultural, spiritual, and economic well-being. We also acknowledge the history of forced removal and disposition that has impacted indigenous peoples and their communities here in West Michigan and around our country. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and extend our acknowledgement to all indigenous peoples who call this land home even today. As an educational institution, we are committed to ongoing learning, reconciliation, and building authentic relationships with our indigenous communities. Thank you for your stewardship of these lands over generations. And also on behalf of President Mantella, I want to convey her deepest regrets for not being able to join us today. However, I assure you that her commitment to building a culture of educational equity as part of our Reach Higher 2025 direction is unwavering. President Mantella believes in the transformative power of education and the importance of creating an inclusive and equitable environment for all members of our community. In addition to our faculty, staff, and students, I want to welcome all of our external community members and guests who are here today. We hope you will come back often to Grand Valley, and you are welcome to any of our events. Please be sure to make this your home. I'm also honored to introduce some members of our esteemed senior leadership team who are here with us today. Dr. Dante Truss is here, our Vice President for Enrollment Development and Educational Outreach. Stacy Beeler, our Vice President for University Relations. She has got a very long title, that's all I'm going to say, is here. And. Thank you, Stacy. And our Vice President for Student Affairs, Jenny Hall-Jones, is also here. Dr. Jenny Hall-Jones. Provost Fatma Mile is joining us virtually, so everybody wave to the Provost, and we'll be hosting the GV Quest panel on understanding Juneteenth at 3 p.m. today with Dean Schaub. So we hope you'll all come back or stay here. It will be in this space at 3 o'clock, and if you aren't able to be here in person, that will also be live cast online, so you can check that out on our website. Additionally, I'd like to just express my gratitude to Professor Bobby J. Smith from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, who has graciously agreed to join us as our first guest speaker. We are honored to have you here, Dr. Smith, and we're really eagerly looking forward to your wisdom, your insights, and all you'll share with us today. And following Dr. Smith's talk, we'll have time for dialogue and questions, so we hope you'll bring some of those with you as well. So as we gather today to observe Juneteenth, we recognize the profound significance of this day. On June 19th, 1865, the last enslaved African Americans in Texas were finally informed of their freedom. Marking the end of slavery, somebody's got to move or something like that. That was not like for dramatic effect at all, but we'll just keep going with this. Marking the end of slavery in the United States, this historic moment symbolizes the emancipation of enslaved people and serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for freedom, equality, and justice. And personally, Juneteenth holds a special place in my heart. Like Dr. Smith, I'm also from Texas, and I have grown up with a deep appreciation for the historical and cultural significance of this day. It serves as a reminder of the resilience, the strength, and the perseverance of all those who fought for freedom and continue to fight for freedom and the rights of our generations today and in the future. So today, as we celebrate Juneteenth and reflect upon its historical significance, let us recommit ourselves to the work of creating a more inclusive and equitable Grand Valley, a more inclusive and equitable society. At GVSU, we are steadfast in our commitment to educational equity, ensuring that all students, faculty, and staff have the opportunity to reach their full potential. with all of their diverse identities and with all of their backgrounds that they bring to our community. Today, let us also honor this day and learn from one another and continue our collective journey towards a more just and equitable future. And before I conclude, I really would like to express my gratitude to all those who helped plan and cook the food and help serve us today. I really want to particularly thank Morgan Knapp, who's in the back, who really, her dedication organizing this event, she pulled it all off, so thank you, Morgan. So now I'm pleased to introduce Jacob Welch from the Executive Office of the Governor, as well as Vice President Stacey Beeler.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacob Welch, and I'm honored to be here today on behalf of Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist to present this proclamation of this day to my alma mater. I'm currently a sophomore at GVSU, and I would like to thank Vice President Bernal for this opportunity, and I'd like to thank Vice President Beeler for this opportunity to give this over. Thank you.
Just quickly, thank you, Jacob. It is an honor on behalf of Grand Valley to welcome you back here always, and those representing the governor, the lieutenant governor. This proclamation is a wonderful acknowledgement of the importance of today's celebration for independence and freedom. So thank you, Jacob. Thank you. There's no way this man can take the stage without some introduction. So, Vice President Dante Truss.
All right, let me adjust this mic just a little bit here. Yes. Good afternoon. Oh, you can do better than that. Good afternoon. I am honored to be a part of this inaugural program. I am truly delighted to have been asked to be a part of. Let's give Vice President Jesse Bernal a round of applause for the development and his team. Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Yeah, thank you. I could go on and on about the importance of Juneteenth, but I know several have already shared, and I want to get the speaker up because this is the person of the hour. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Bobby J. Smith II. And he is an interdisciplinary sociologist and assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is currently on research leave this academic school year as a fellow of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Dr. Smith's research uses socio-historical and community-based approaches to analyze historical and contemporary struggles for food justice and food sovereignty in Black communities in the United States. His first book, Food, Power, Politics, The Food Story of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, will be released in August 2023 by the University of North Carolina Press. We look forward to getting a copy of that. He has been awarded fellowships from the American Council of Learned Societies, National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, and at the University of Mississippi, among others. Dr. Smith graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture with a focus on agricultural economics from Prairie View A&M University. He earned a Master of Science degree in agriculture economics and a PhD in development sociology from Cornell University. Join me in welcoming Dr. Smith to the stage.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Vice President Truss, for the kind introduction. To President Mantella, Provost Milley, members of the President's Cabinet and Office, faculty, staff, students, various members of the Grand Valley State University and Greater Grand Rapids communities, I am Bobby J. Smith II, and I am honored to be the keynote speaker for this inaugural Juneteenth celebration. Special shout out to my family, friends, and my colleagues at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and visitors who are live streaming this event. The title of my keynote today is The Food Voice of Juneteenth, Black Roots, Black Remembrance, and Black resistance. This keynote offers a critical space to think about the historical significance of this one day. Some 24 hours out of an entire year when we as a nation pause due to the signing of the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act of 2001, collectively pause to recognize the moment that freedom finally arrived to enslaved Africans in Galveston, Texas. On June 19, 1865, after years of wars, revolts, and struggles to free themselves. And then the news of freedom spread by word of mouth to other enslaved Africans across the state. The efforts of many Black women, including 96-year-old Miss Opal Lee of Fort Worth, Texas, who is often referred to as the grandmother of Juneteenth, who pressured the federal government to recognize Juneteenth as a federal holiday, which led to the signing of the Juneteenth Act and provided us with this moment where we can learn about this point in history when all enslaved Africans in America were made legally free. I say all because what we do know is that 2 years prior, in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Yet in an act of pure defiance, white plantation owners and white politicians in Texas failed to recognize this. But once enslaved Africans in Texas received the news of emancipation, the rules of Black social struggle changed. This keynote is an invitation to think deeply about the long history of Juneteenth, about race, about freedom, about resistance, about equity. As a native Black Texan, Juneteenth is personal. For generations, my father's side of the family memorialized this day. And when I accepted the invitation to speak at this event, I was overwhelmed and a bit nervous about taking on the huge responsibility of talking about a day that has always been a part of my life. While I grew up celebrating Juneteenth, I had grown accustomed to only Black Texans celebrating it. I also never thought about the holiday along academic or intellectual lines. For me, Juneteenth was about family, celebrations, and Black culture. While Juneteenth is the oldest recognized African-American holiday in the United States, Juneteenth remained a secret in many respects for over 150 years. I use the word secret because that's how my father described the holiday when I called him to tell him about this keynote, and he began to reflect on Juneteenth. He said it was a secret because early celebrations occurred outside the gaze of society and even the gaze of white Texans. Born in the 1950s in Waco, Texas, my father has vivid memories of celebrating Juneteenth in what was then known as Comanche Crossing, the site of what is now Booker T. Washington Park and its pavilion on Lake Mexia, just west of the city of Mexia, Texas. As I prepared for this keynote, I called my father and simply asked him, what does Juneteenth mean to you, and what has it meant for our family through the years? My dad is retired, so of course it was a long conversation, and he recalled 100 years of family celebrations and said to me, when I was growing up, it was something big, a big deal. For my grandmother and great-grandmother and others, it gave them a chance to celebrate our heritage in a little place called Comanche Crossing on Lake Mexia in Central Texas. It was a day off for us. It was a feast. We had watermelon, cantaloupes, beans, all types of greens, barbecue chicken and ribs, smoked homemade sausages, raccoon meat, and other wild game. We had cakes, pies, and other sweets. In that one day out of the year, we felt like we were someone. As I listened to my father speak about food, I could sense a spirit of joy and excitement in his voice. His descriptions of these earlier Juneteenth celebrations provided historical texture to the celebrations I attended as a child in the 1990s in my hometown of Fort Worth, Texas. I remembered how Black folks in the city would basically shut the city down for Juneteenth. Parks, outdoor venues, backyards, fairgrounds, and trail rides would be transformed into incubators for the development of intergenerational interactions that facilitated the process for the exchange of community and familiar knowledge surrounding Juneteenth. In many respects, my father was using what food studies scholar Annie Hawk Lawson theorizes as the food voice to talk about Juneteenth. Hawk Lawson writes that the food voice represents the social, symbolic dimension to food. The concept situates food as a nexus in social interaction, that is, the place, use, and appearance of food that can serve to identify and make known the position, values, and actions of individuals and groups of people. As a scholar of the African American and agricultural and food experience, I was intrigued by how my father talked about the food in Juneteenth. He brought to life his early days of observing how the folks in his community would gather together around an open fire and barbecue and just be, and as he put it, where no one could bother us. In 1963, my grandmother moved my father and his siblings to Fort Worth, Texas, but they would still drive 2 hours southwest of the city to what they call the country to celebrate Juneteenth. By the early to mid-1970s, my father attended Fort Worth celebrations at places like Sycamore Park, where they had vendors. They even blocked off the highway, held contests, and had a huge party that covered several blocks. Throughout my conversation with my father as I transitioned to writing this keynote, I just held the phone and let him talk. My father's food voice spoke to how food is a cultural artifact in the lives of Black people. As sustenance and symbolism, food is being used as a focal point and site by which many Black folks track the progress their communities have made over time and space. Food also demarcates particular moments in the lives of Black people and conjures memories of comfort, freedom, refusal, resilience, unease, poverty, struggle, and inequality. As foodways scholar Rafia Zafar put it, food is a field of Black action. In listening to my father's food voice, it became clear that he conceptualized Juneteenth as a site of Black action, and food was at the center. Yet when we rehearse the story of Juneteenth as a nation, we often erase the significance of food and how it shapes our understandings of Juneteenth. When we take a closer look at Juneteenth through the lens of food, we learn about the Black roots of Juneteenth. We intentionally think about how Black remembrance helps us protect and preserve this day. We have a blueprint for thinking about Black resistance and what it means for today. Such ways of knowing all collide as food enters the history of Juneteenth. Food enters the Black roots of Juneteenth as a way of life. In her seminal text, High on the Hog, A Culinary Journey from Africa to America, that inspired the 2021 Netflix limited series of the same name, award-winning Black food writer and anthropologist Jessica B. Harris writes, "The backbone of Juneteenth festivities has always been the table. Picnics and barbecues were hallmarks of the early celebrations. Barbecue ribs and fried chicken, and myriad variations on summer produce like black-eyed peas, peaches, and watermelon. Building with Harris, food was at the center of Juneteenth from the beginning and even before freedom arrived in Texas. What we know today as farm to table was a way of life. And for African people, agrarianism, which facilitated the process of growing food, was natural. African people were violently forced and transported to what we now call the United States of America because of their agrarian knowledge. The roots of Juneteenth are located in the African agricultural experience, and the early celebrations were mostly on Black farms across the state and in rural Black communities, or what some now call freedom colonies in Texas. Some 557 historic Black settlements founded between 1865 and 1930. According to the website of the Texas Freedom Colonies Project, freedom colonies were intentional communities created largely in response to political and economic repression by mainstream white society. These colonies were based on an agricultural economy designed and organized by free Africans in Texas. This economy was not only a source of economic vitality, but also food security, an economy that allowed them to be self-sufficient. Celebrating the Black roots of Juneteenth requires us to acknowledge and engage with the African agricultural experience, which informs how food enters the history of Juneteenth. Celebrating the Black roots of Juneteenth also challenges us to think about Black remembrance. That is, how Black people in general and Black Texans in particular memorialize, preserve, and construct ideas around this day. Fellow native Black Texan and historian Amilcar Shabazz writes that before Texans had their own history, schools, churches, martyrs, and women and men of big affairs, they had Juneteenth. It may not have looked like much in the eyes of an arrogant world, but it was everything Black Texans had, and they each loved and cherished that day with all their heart. And most important of all, they remembered. Facing their past together, they gathered the scattered meanings of their prehistory and put themselves to the task of creating a new collective persona, the freed men and freed women of the land known as the United States of America. What must be added to Shabazz's statement is that enslaved people remembered their agrarian past and honored that. The first years of Juneteenth celebrations required freed Africans to cultivate land and raise vegetables and livestock for nourishment, especially during Juneteenth, or what they also called Jubilee Day or Emancipation Day. Therefore, food enters Black memories of Juneteenth, and that it symbolizes community, self-sufficiency, and social interactions with family, friends, and neighbors. Before the onset of grocery stores and other forms of food outlets, growing up preparing food for Juneteenth was an intergenerational practice that enabled Black people to foster joy and not think about the everyday struggles of life. My father explained to me that many times Juneteenth was the one time families got together during the year, and they refused to let the oppression that they faced for just being Black and who they were disrupt their pride in being free and Black. Recipes were something to be proud of, and those careful instructions, whether written down or passed down through the oral tradition, reinforced culture. For example, my father's mother was known for baking sweet potato pies. This past weekend, we reminisced on how my grandmother often made her best pies during the summer months, especially around Juneteenth. Although my grandmother passed away 10 years ago and never wrote the recipe down, my father attempts almost every year to master the recipe and continue the tradition. He strives to recreate the creative culinary expertise of my grandmother. Thinking about such moments in the context of Juneteenth speaks to how African American cuisine is rooted in the histories and cultures of everyday Black folks like my grandmother. Black practices of remembering Juneteenth also brings into focus methods of Black resistance that are located at the intersection of progression and oppression. In the 100 years following Juneteenth, African Americans were forced to navigate high levels of inequality and physical violence in their quest for freedom through social movements that secured civil rights and voting rights in the 1960s for Black people that impacted all people. The pushback against such efforts have been unwavering since Juneteenth. As my father put it, Juneteenth was an ending of a way of life for white Texans and larger society, and a beginning of life for us as Black folks being recognized as a people. In thinking with my father's statement, Juneteenth represented the moment where Africans in Texas were no longer recognized as only a crucial economic variable in an equation designed to enhance the agricultural economy of the nation built on cotton, rice, and sugar. Yet what writer and scholar of African American literature and cultural history, Saidiya Hartman, calls the afterlife of slavery, or the enduring effects of slavery on Black life, still impacts Black folks today. This afterlife also includes what sociologist Ronaldo Walcott calls glimpses of freedom, where Black people experience moments of freedom in the face of ongoing struggle for emancipation realized. Indeed, the last 158 years since Juneteenth has shown us that emancipation is a process. Food insecurity is critical to this moment we're in, and activists in what we call food justice and food sovereignty movements are working to address this, as the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA's Economic Research Service, reports that Black households are the most food insecure in our nation, with rates that are twice as much as the national food insecurity rate. The fact that Black people are the most food insecure population in our nation should push us all to address this issue in the context of Black lives as we address it elsewhere. Beyond food, Black resistance is mobilizing in Texas even as we speak against the recent news related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI offices in public colleges and universities in the Lone Star State. According to CNN, just 5 days before Juneteenth 2023, today, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill on Wednesday, June 14th, 2023, that bans DEI offices at public colleges and universities across the state. While it is too early to sociologically measure the impact of this bill, what is clear is that the efforts and work of those DEI offices designed to promote inclusion in public higher education in Texas will be curtailed and eliminated. Yet the spirit of such efforts will not die. The lifeblood of DEI efforts pumps through the veins of Black struggle, and this Juneteenth should empower and inspire us all to pay close attention to how Texas is moving, just as they did on June 19, 1865. In many respects, we have to honor symbolic celebrations for Juneteenth because they give us hope. At the same time, we must move to direct action. We can look to how in the wake of Juneteenth, freed Africans brought land and settled their own communities centered around a Black agricultural economy in the face of debilitating inequities along racial, social, economic, political, environmental, and gendered lines. Many of these communities no longer exist today, but the spirit of those fearless Black folks who lived in them as they navigated an uncertain future with strength and courage lives in their descendants today. I am one of those descendants, and Juneteenth reminds us to pursue justice in all aspects of society. It also represents a time for me to renew my commitment to pursuing Black freedom, which will ultimately free all people. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Hall-Jones. I'm honored to serve as our Vice President of Student Affairs here at Grand Valley, and I'm super honored to facilitate a little Q&A. And so I think, okay. And what I had said, if nobody asked a question, that I would be happy to ask, because my undergrad was in sociology, and so we're sitting here at the table. And I was like, I didn't have faculty like you when I was in my classes. And then I said to him, because I read some of the classes that he teaches, one on food and race. And so I said, that kind of thing would have been fascinating for me. I wish I am able to take your class. And after listening to him, I really want to take his class. Don't you think? Yeah. So one round of applause, one more. Thank you so much. And we'll pass it over to our first question asker, and then I will come down and grab the mic and be ready for others. So go ahead. You were like handing him a mic. I don't have a question. Who's got a question?
Thank you so much for your talk. I was really interested in when you were talking about food security, food sovereignty, and kind of tying it to larger conversations about Black Lives Mattering. And I don't know if this is anything that you do, but I was wondering, do you have any thoughts about some of the movements that have come up in both urban and rural spaces around Black family gardening and farming and things like that, and the ways that that can return certain amounts of food security, and how does that tie to kind of what you were talking about?
Thank you. Yeah, so thinking about food security, particularly in rural and urban communities, are we thinking particularly Black communities or communities? Okay. So when I talked about the food justice movement, for those who don't know, a quick definition of the food justice movement is that it's a movement that uses food and agriculture as vehicles to address social inequalities along race, gender, a number of other identities in Black communities, particularly Black food justice movements, should I say, and Black food sovereignty movements that argue that Black people should control when, where, and how they access food. So in thinking about gardens are especially important because that's one way that people can exercise autonomy in their own spaces or agency, or able to control what they eat. So the early days of the food justice movement, many people were focusing on how Black communities, right here in the state of Michigan, so when you think about Detroit, you think about D-Town Farms. D-Town Farms in Detroit was one of the forerunners of one of the contemporary versions of what we call the food justice movement, and they were really big about thinking about community gardens and urban farms and things like that. So that's central to the work, but also it's reminiscent of what enslaved people did on plantations before the Emancipation Proclamation. What we do know is that during slavery times, food was used as a weapon against enslaved people. When I say a weapon, means that it was taken away from them to starve them into submission. But in response, enslaved people would create these what they call slave gardens, these pockets of gardens with fresh vegetables, sometimes fruits, and also they raised livestock there, where they would take care of themselves in times where food was used as a weapon against them. So the garden movement, gardens and urban farms and things like that in black communities is also a part of a longer tradition of black folks doing work around gardening and farming. Thank you. Next question.
Come on. You can ask it into the microphone. Okay, I'm coming over here.
Hi.
Hi.
Not to brag, my husband is a community garden organizer, and we're having an event tonight, but I'm not going to invite all you guys. Anyway, but my question is, so I grew up partially in Virginia, and there's a history of black farmers that, like, not many of us know about, but and I have heard little rumors that maybe the Department of Agriculture is doing things to kind of revitalize that tradition. Can you just tell us anything, like how are black farmers doing these days?
So I can't report on how all black farmers are doing these days. So I don't want to, also we're live streaming, so I don't want to take on the role of talking about what all black farmers are experiencing right now. But historically, what we do know is that black farmers have been impacted by a number of policies, both written and unwritten policies that have led to a rapid decline in black farmland. Some people call it black land theft. So when thinking about this idea of black farmers, the USDA is attempting, the United States Department of Agriculture is attempting to remedy some of those effects. But they have to remedy over a century of inequality. And it's going to take longer than just a year or two of initiatives. And we're used to seeing initiatives being rolled out, and after 2 years, we'll get people to evaluate it. I mean, we're at a university, so people evaluate these programs, then it goes away. But these kinds of issues require us to really dig deeper into the historical context around black farmers and how their land was taken away as part of a larger conversation, particularly rooted in the rural South here in the United States. So black farmers today are fighting against that. They're trying to organize. They're organizing organizations. They're organizing conferences, both urban and rural-based conferences to address it. The USDA about 2 years ago rolled out what they call the Equity Commission. So that commission was designed to study the plight of black farmers and agriculture and black life in general, and then report back to Secretary Vilsack to talk about what could be done. Cory Booker put forward some legislation back in 2020, also last year, every year around what they're calling the Justice for Black Farmers Act. It's still not, it hasn't been passed yet, so it's more of just a bill that's been going through Congress, but also there's been a pushback against that. I want to say a group of white farmers in Wisconsin actually put in a litigation against that act, saying that it was racial and things of that nature. So black farmers are working both in the public sphere and they're also working through the government, but also there's always this pushback. As I said before, the pushback against black life has been unwavering since Juneteenth. And because of that, we can't necessarily, black people in particular, can't necessarily depend on the government to do certain things for us, because the government also, in a way, is complicit, has been complicit in the plight of black farmers. So black farmers today are still strong. They're still fighting. Although they're less than 2% of American farmers less than 2% of American farmers are black based on the ag census of our nation, black farmers are still working in their own pockets, organizing their own associations, organizing their own groups around both single crops, also around sustainable farming, also around organic farming. So when we think about black farmers, it's not just this idea of one type of way of farming. We're in the Midwest, so we think mostly about farming around corn or maybe some soybean and things like that. But for black farmers, it's both the monocropping system, but also how do we use those systems to feed our communities? Because we recognize that there's been a history of people not being concerned about our communities. So who's going to look out for black people? Black people are going to do that, and that's what black farmers are doing right now.
Yeah, so I don't know what is out there beyond West Michigan, but there are a couple food clubs that exist here for individuals that have economic hardships. And I wondered if there was a push to do that where it provides more dignity for the people who are going there to get the food. The vegetables and the healthy things are less. They pay like, I mean, I know in Holland, they pay like $11 a month to be a part, and then they can get so many points, and then they can get food with the points. And the healthy things are fewer points than the Doritos, right? So there are things that they can do. Do you know if there's a push to do more of that around the nation in Black communities, especially because of all the economic disparity that exists?
Thank you for your question. This question was about, is there, so basically there's a rise of like cooperatives and food clubs and things of that nature that you're seeing here in Western Michigan, and particularly in Black communities. So it's a national phenomenon in many ways. So I can name a number of people from New York City to Oakland, California, to Dallas, Texas, to Jackson, Mississippi, to Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, people are thinking about dignity because that's important. Because when we think about how we access food, our relationships with food have changed over the years. I mean, grocery stores are relatively new in the history of our nation. I mean, the last 60 to 70 years, we've seen a big push for grocery stores, superstores, and things of that nature. But before that, people were already going to these local places to get their foods, or they were growing their own foods, because prior to 1930, majority of our nation was rural. So people were growing their own food, and they were sharing their food in their communities. But there is a larger push towards thinking about dignity, economic hardship, and how can we address that through food? But also, how do we ensure that the food that people who have those hardships actually want to buy the food? Many times we have these farmers markets, but it's not culturally appropriate foods. Everyone's not eating kale. Everyone's not eating kohlrabi, things of that nature. While these are superfoods and they are healthy and they are great, believe me, this is not a anti-kohlrabi kale talk. This talk is pro fruits and vegetables for everyone. But I will say culturally appropriate foods are important, and you give people dignity by providing what they actually need. But to give them what they need, you have to ask them what they need. We live in a nation that is prescriptive mostly. And thank you. And we have to begin to ask people what they want. And so when you give people dignity, you actually go to them and say, what do you want to eat? Because oftentimes when farmers markets or these local food markets fail, it's not the farmer or the person who's growing the food fault, it's the person's fault. They're too lazy. They don't want to eat healthy. Or they don't even know what eating healthy is. And I think those kinds of assumptions are dangerous. And people are food insecure. And people even in this room may not admit it, but somebody in this room is also food insecure. So how do we give them dignity is by asking them what they want. And what kind of shopping experience do you want? Do you want to go into a grocery store where everybody can see what you're doing? Or do you want more of like more of an Instacart model where you go online? I mean, we're thinking about COVID, post-COVID nation, so digital. So do you want to order your food and have it delivered so people don't even know what you're getting? Because people are very private about their food business. So when they are, we have to think about how can we begin to address their needs, and dignity is at the center. And I can name a number of organizations. I won't start naming a number of them because then I might leave one out. But there are a number of, I can literally think in each state, I can name at least one organization that's doing that kind of work.
We have a question over here, but I'm going to do like a little preview because this is our fabulous alumna, Shannon Cohen, who also rocked it out to Sneaker Ball at our Black Men and Boys Symposium last week. So I want to thank her for being a fabulous speaker for us. And now I'll let you have the mic.
Thank you, Dr. Hall Jones. Dr. Smith, thank you for being here. I actually brought my 9-year-old son with me because I wanted him to participate in a Junteeth event where he would see himself. So thank you. I'm excited that I was able to bring him. So my question is to you as a human. I know I often talk to him, he's probably gonna be mad at me, but I often talk about the fact that we get glimpses of purpose in our childhood, and sometimes there's catalysts that cause us prompt us to activism. So I'm really curious, what were some of those catalysts for you that caused you to want to pursue a career at the intersections of food, justice, and equity?
Wow. I'm smiling because I know my family is actually on the live stream too. So I like glimpses of purpose. I like that as a concept, and I'm going to think about that as I'm answering your question. I come from generations of Black folks who worked the land. both in Pitt County, North Carolina, and places outside of Waco, Texas. So for me, agriculture has always been a part of my life. But the story around agriculture in Black life is sometimes read as oppressive. So when I decided to go into agriculture, my family was surprised because they were like, we worked too hard for you to go back into the fields. And rightfully so. They worked very hard to ensure that we didn't have to live a life that was tied to the land. Also because in context, land was a source of power, but also oppression. And many times kids only see the oppression and parents kind of hold the power to themselves to face another day. So for me, I have that, so I come from that type of generation first. So that's my first glimpse, is that it's in my roots. The second glimpse is that when I was in high school, my sister, who was actually on the live stream, she studied at Prairie View before me, and she studied agronomy, and she was a USDA scholar. There's a big program the USDA does for people, particularly Black students who go to historically Black colleges that are known as 1890 land-grant schools, and Prairie View is the Texas land-grant. So she studied agronomy there from 2002 to 2006, and about my junior year in high school in 2005, she was like, you should come down for the summer and do a research apprentice program for agricultural sciences at Prairie View. I was like, well, sure. I mean, I'll do it. I mean, at that time, I thought I wanted to be an engineer or a doctor, so a medical doctor, because I am a doctor, but not a medical doctor. I didn't want to be a medical doctor, so I wanted to be a medical doctor. So she was like, just come down for the summer, see if you like it. And going to Prairie View the summer of 2005 changed my entire life. I had never seen so many Black people committed to thinking about agriculture as a form of economic vitality and a source of power and security. And when I went there that summer, I actually learned how to raise chickens scientifically. It's a research apprentice program, so we incubated chickens for 21 days, then we watched them hatch. And then we took them out to the land, and then of course, we learned about the other part of the process that gets them to your plate. So after that process, I became even more intrigued by agriculture, and I was like, I want to major in agriculture. So the second summer, I did the research, we call it RAP program, the RAP program again, and that time I studied omega-3 fatty oils, fish oils in labs. So I knew I wanted to do agriculture, but I was like, listen, I want to do agriculture, but I just don't want to be tied to a farm, because for me, farming in my family is not necessarily seen as something that's lucrative or something you can go into as a business. Although my sister kind of pioneered my family shifting to think about agriculture as something different. So my mentor, Dr. Alfred Parks, who created the RAP program, ended up telling me you can go into agriculture but study agricultural economics. And when he told me that, I applied to Prairie View. Prairie View was the only school I applied to, got in, and he was my mentor the entire way. And when I say the entire way, I just saw him 3 weeks ago, and I was finally able to give him his flowers in person because he changed my life. I mean, so after I graduated from Prairie View, he took me to Cornell. He took me around, made me visit people. He mentored me. I called him many times throughout the process, and he was one of my first glimpses of progress in terms of thinking about agriculture as something, as a career, as a professor. Also, people like Dr. Watts Jones at the school as well. So those kind of people were really important to me, and those are kind of like my glimpses of progress. And then when I got to New York, to Ithaca, New York, I learned about food justice from a friend of mine by the name of Rafael Aponte. At the time, he was the only Black farmer in Ithaca, and he introduced me to this idea of food justice. So I have both the family background, then I have the educational background, but then also that brought me to think about food justice today. And those are my glimpses of progress because of those moments. And again, this was not something that I had planned. I knew that I wanted to get a PhD from day one when I was an undergraduate in 2007, but I didn't know where it would take me or where it would go. But I knew that agriculture and food would be able to carry me because I had so many examples of it. And that's really a message I like to share with a lot of particularly Black boys and Black girls in particular, and Black people in general in particular, is that agriculture can be something more than just farming. There are some 13,000 jobs available right now through the USDA that need to be filled. And they need folks who have jobs, who are trained in agricultural skills, agricultural science, ag marketing, ag communication. I mean, I could just name all, there's over 17 agencies under the USDA. So for me, it's a matter of generational with my family, but then also translating that to what it means to study agriculture, and then what does it mean to take agriculture as a study and think about something that can impact people's lives through social movements. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? I mean, I have one, but okay. Ooh, all right, I got you in the middle. I told him earlier I had one in my pocket in case I needed to ask it.
Hello. Thank you for being here, and I had to type this out because I was like, I'm gonna mess this up if I don't. So on the topic of Juneteenth and food, we have seen many entities promote their perception of allyship that by selling products such as Junteeth watermelon salad, as one example. What are your thoughts on food targeting marketing, and what advice would you give us in the room on how we can either address, stand up, or combat that?
So we're thinking about how certain, so we're thinking about food targeted marketing is what you said, right? Food marketing. So a study a while back, actually I talk about this in my class on race and food security. I talk about this sometimes where what we do know is that studies show that people like, companies like Doritos and Sprite particularly target communities of color, particularly black and brown communities. So we know that's happening. So we know that when you go into some of these communities and you watch well, one, you go into the communities, you drive around and you see billboards like Doritos and chips and all those kind of things up there. Secondly, if you go into their houses and watch TV with them, you also begin to see there's a lot of commercials around like eating junk food, junk food. And because of that, it's created a culture where eating junk food is acceptable. Now, let's be clear. Nothing's wrong with eating junk food every once in a while. The problem becomes when that's the only thing that you're eating, when that's the only thing you have access to. So how are people in particular fighting back against that? They're organizing these healthy food classes, nutritious food classes, where they're showing people, one, that foods that you know of already that are culturally appropriate are also very nutritious. For example, collard greens. We think about collard greens as like the centerpiece of a soul food plate. If you go to a restaurant, it's got to have collard greens on it alongside some other pork chops or fried chicken or sweet potatoes or things like that. But collard greens are also some of the most nutritious plants in the world. I mean, collard greens can provide so much to people. But when we think about it, we tend to situate it in different conversations. So when we begin to recast or reimagine this idea of soul food, we see that some of those foods are extremely healthy, extremely nutritious. But how are people fighting back against it? One way they're doing is by creating what we're calling food literacy classes, where they're showing people how to prepare certain foods in different ways, in ways that can promote more development of their bodies, both young and old people. But when thinking about this idea of Juneteenth food and appropriation, if you will, and allyship, that's the reason why in my talk I talked about the black roots of Juneteenth. For some folks, it might have said, oh, well, you just said the same thing. Black roots and Juneteenth, isn't it the same thing? Juneteenth doesn't even say black in that. We call it Juneteenth, but it doesn't scream black. So it's important for us to reinforce that Juneteenth in and of itself is a black cultural creation. Black folks decided what Juneteenth was. When the general came to Galveston, all he said was that y'all was free. And then the black folks said, well, actually, we're free, but this is Emancipation Day for us. So we're going to call it Juneteenth and thinking about the intersection between those two things. So for me, in thinking about food marketing, is that the same way that we think about the production, consumption, and distribution of local foods in other communities, we should also think about those in black communities, because that's a way that we can begin to disrupt or counter the prevalence of that kind of marketing that then not necessarily causes but shapes what people eat in their everyday lives. So I think that's the way that we can begin to do that by also thinking about what people are doing outside around food literacy, maybe agricultural literacy, but then also thinking about the long history of how black folks have struggled just to feed themselves. And oftentimes when they want to feed themselves nutritious foods. They just didn't have access to it. The government food programs, which we call the surplus commodities program, or what we call government cheese or government peanut butter, was just to make it. That was survival food, but they wanted to have access to nutritious foods that could feed them. So that's kind of how people, so I gave you some historical texture because that's how I'm thinking about this conversation around food targeted marketing, in particularly black and brown communities. Thank you for your question. Other questions?
Hi, thank you so much for this great talk. Many of us in the room are educators, teachers. So I'm wondering, for the many educators in the room, what are the best practices to bring this to the classroom? How do we help our students not just develop awareness, but engage in the work?
Thank you. Really, really great question, because let me get back in the mic. Really, really great question, because there's a big push right now about just exposing children and teenagers to agriculture or food, local foods and things like that. But how does that translate into people actually doing the work and going into this and seeing this as a viable way of life? And I think the responsibility of the educator, one is to expose, but also I think experiential learning is important. I think people have to connect food or connect agriculture to actually going outside and seeing what it looks like, doing farm tours, but also meeting people who understand that agriculture can also be a way of life. Most oftentimes, marginalized communities aren't able to see agriculture as a way of life. They know it's important because it feeds our nation. They know they got to eat because the food pyramid or the nutrition, that's another story. I won't talk about the pyramid. I don't even go there. But students are exposed to this, but they have to actually see it. Because it's one thing to like eat chicken in particular. It's another thing to see someone raise chickens and how they take care of chickens. It's one thing to eat a salad. It's another thing to go to an actual field and see the cabbage and see the different types of leafy green vegetables and things like that. Because then you begin to see the connection, but then you also have to teach them what's going on the business side. So for educators, the best approach is a food systems level approach, where we track food from the seed all the way to a person's plate, then also how it is recycled or the waste and things like that, and how we create the system again. Because when people see it as a system, because many times we talk about the criminal justice system, we talk about the educational system, but we don't talk about food as a system. And there is a massive food system that not only feeds our nation, but feeds the world. And people have to understand how that works, because to get food to a grocery store is a very tedious and complex process. I mean, I've studied the process, so I can see each point of the food systems level analysis that I think students would like. So for educators, if you're in elementary school, maybe just pick one part of the system that they can most relate to, and maybe connect it to school lunch programs. I mean, not the food that's necessarily on the lunch plates, which again is a whole nother conversation I'm not going to get into, but to think about maybe thinking about cheese on pizza and how is cheese created and where does the milk come from, or thinking about vegan cheese and what does that mean. So then we have a conversation about veganism or vegetarianism. So you use cheese, so it's almost like thinking about the social life of particular food products, and you do that at different levels, and maybe at the high school level you bring in science. So not only do they learn about the foods, they learn also how it is processed, produced, and made acceptable to meet USDA standards to then go into our grocery stores. So I think educators can do it through a food systems level analysis. Thank you.
Okay, team, we probably have time for one more question. Do we have another question over there?
Since we have time for one more, just following up on that last question and your response, it was more a comment or an observation than a question. Didn't Michelle Obama work really hard to create that bring the kids to the garden experience and to help them begin to build that understanding? And look at how the nation responded to that. It's very disappointing. So how do we do that hard work? How do you keep pushing it then?
I think framing is important. So the question was about how do we do that as a nation around education when, of course, Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign was really big around 2009, 2010, when she invited all these people to the White House lawn and she had chefs and gardeners and things of that nature there. I think it's about framing. I think what we could add to Michelle Obama's initiative is actually thinking about how kids can get jobs in those areas. Michelle Obama was talking about how just to get people to eat better and eat healthier, which is important, or move around, exercise, which is important. But there's also ways to do this work and make a living. And I think we often don't attach food and agriculture to making a living. And also how we treat fast food workers shows how we think about food, because we don't treat them with dignity. So I bring up fast food workers in, because again, it's all about how we interact with food, how we relate to food. And I think Michelle Obama's program was an important first step. But I think the nation responded that way because then people are like, well, what about jobs? Like, who's going to be a chef? Like, why? Like, who wants to grow up and be a chef? Chef, that type of thing. So I think it's about how we frame it. And I think being a chef is important, but I'm thinking about how the nation responded to it. But also we do recognize there are other things that play beyond how the nation responded to it. Again, that is not the purpose of this talk, so I will not go into that. But I do think that Michelle Obama's program was the perfect first step, and I think it's a model for us to build on. And I think even a research study would be to track those who actually went to the White House line that day, and what are they doing now? Did some of them end up becoming chefs? Did some of them end up going to work for USDA? Like a longitudinal study of their lives over the last 10 to 15 years? I wonder, because then we can also assess the impact of her program. Because while the program was eventually eliminated, also because the Obamas, were done, President Obama was done with his office, I think that's important for that. That's a first step, but framing is important, therefore, going forward. And for me in my own work, again, getting back to the question about glimpses of progress, I think we have to also remember to attach agriculture and food to actually making a living, that people can, that you don't have to necessarily only be a farmer. We can make agriculture to farming when there's a whole agricultural system that is being controlled both at the federal level, the local level, and the regional level. There are scientists, there are anthropologists, there are sociologists, there are political scientists. I mean, there are so many people who shape how food gets to our plates. But people don't take the time to study that or don't even know that they can study it. So maybe our job is to, one, spark interest, but then show them, now here's a person who works for the Natural Resources, NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Services under the USDA, and this is how they do soil science. My sister studied agronomy. I didn't even know what agronomy was before she studied it in 2002. But then I learned about soil science. Then I learned about crop science. Then I went to animal science. Then I went to dairy science. And that was foundational for me because now I'm like, wow, there's this whole system that I knew nothing about. You can take the plate today and we can track each thing off that plate. And I think framing is important. So the first step is interest, sparking it, but then we also have to frame it as you can make a living. The same way we say engineers can make money, medical doctors, mathematicians, statisticians, you can also make a lot of money in agriculture. It just depends on what you want to do. Thank you for your question. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bobby J. Smith, for being our inaugural Juneteenth celebration speaker. And we've got you a little something from Grand Valley to take back with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Do you want a last word?
So also, I was asked, do I want a last word? I wasn't going to say anything, but I do have a last word. I have a new book coming out next month called Food, Power, Politics, the food story of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, where I address a number of these questions through the context of the American Civil Rights Movement. I argue that alongside voting rights and education, food was equally important to the Civil Rights Movement. And if we study food in the movement, we can also learn about issues of food security, food justice, and food sovereignty today in Black communities. It'll be out next month, published by the University of North Carolina Press. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.